Welcome, folks. We'll give folks a couple minutes to find their link and sign on. I'm running the slides today, folks, so buckle your seatbelts. For some reason, talking and running slides at the same time is it's my weakness. It just doesn't like jibe in my brain. And I tell the story, so forgive me if you've heard this, but I actually ended the webinar once. I was trying to stop sharing my slides and I just ended the webinar. And thank God people came back. I couldn't believe everybody came back, but it it's a dubious, bumpy ride. Thanks for being here, Haley. It is a relevant topic right now. We were just talking about that before we started the webinar, that there have been I don't know if I'd say a proliferation, but it's really timely. And so there have been a lot more webinars about what's happening at the federal level from various different angles. And I have been just joining them right and left because I really like to be in community with folks right now and just hear about what's going on and hear what people are doing. And even when the news is bad, to find out that people are still, doing the work, showing up every day and working towards making things a little bit better. So thanks everybody for being here. It's really great to have you. We'll give it maybe one more minute for folks to come in, find their links. I was personally so excited last year at this time that the picture that we have here is from right after ReFed at the lobby day in Washington. And it looks like things were really in great shape at the federal level. And it was such an exciting time. So kind of a bummer to be back here talking about this a year later in a different context, but we're still here. Everybody's showing up. So we'll keep moving forward. A couple of reminders as we go. It is helpful for you to drop your questions into the Q&A and not into the chat. Sometimes the chat will go by pretty quickly and we can miss things, but the Q&A gives us an opportunity to answer them and to see them. So make sure that you put your questions. There's already a question in the Q&A from Nora. Thank you for demonstrating how it's done. Yes, we will be sharing the recording later. It takes like a day or two, I think, for it to download, another day or two for us to get the email out. But within the next week, people who registered for this webinar will get the link, and eventually it will be back up on our website as well. And we are recording it, hence the ability to send it out. And at the end of the webinar, we will provide you information about our next one coming up. So, I kind of alluded to the situation there at the beginning. We were in a completely different space last year, but now in July of 2025, where are we? Well, we are seeing a lot of kind of not great things happening. EPA grants like SARE, which I know a lot of folks in this space have received, the Green and Healthy Home Initiatives grants, which is one that we had received ourselves. They've been terminated or pooled unceremoniously. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the funding stream, especially when it comes to government grants. I will say that the lawsuits against the EPA around those grant terminations have been successful across the board. I haven't heard of any that have failed. I don't know what the long-term results of that are going to be, if they're going to continue to fight them at the federal level or if they will be reinstated. But there are some causes for optimism. Nevertheless, that's really chaotic. Those are a lot of those are reimbursement grants. We at 412 Food Rescue had already spent money towards our grant, and I know a lot of folks had. So that uncertainty is really slowing things down. As you know, we're also seeing cuts to charitable food programs like SNAP and WIC and the local food purchasing agreements that impact food banks. So the charitable food system is also being hit pretty hard by cuts. This is so grim. I don't even want to go through my bullet points. There's also been a lot of cuts to the federal workforce, and those have targeted agencies that are really relevant to our work. The EPA has been particularly hard hit by the layoffs, but FDA and USDA have also been hit by layoffs. Some of our long-term contacts that we all know and are used to working with are no longer at their jobs. And so this is all causing ripple effects through both the charitable food system and the environmental justice movements. And I was actually asked by a reporter recently, what's the impact on nonprofits? And we're really getting squeezed from both ends, right? Where our funding is getting cut, both in terms of those like the LFPA for food banks, but also all of the grants that we were looking towards from the EPA. And then the need is growing. And I think we're going to see that need grow even more with those cuts to benefits when those kick in. So there's a lot of unsurety, a lot of fear. Oh my God, think everything's terrible and on fire. But there are some causes for hope or some pieces of good news. And so I want to talk about the good news because it's so easy to doom scroll and to just look at the things that are happening at the federal level and want to pull the covers over your head or just, escape. So for starters, some of you maybe were at ReFed this year. This was the largest ReFed ever. There were 750 attendees. And so the industry, the will to address food waste has not been dampened. In fact, it continues. And one of the things I was really nervous about going to Waste Expo this year, which happened before ReFed, is I wasn't sure if we were going to see a backtracking on commitment to sustainability at the corporate level. And so far, I have not seen that. While some of the language is changing, we're not seeing what we've seen like with DEI, where companies are fleeing like it's a sinking ship. That's not happening around sustainability. Those goals continue. Secondly, and we'll talk more about the federal level in a second, but according to the food waste legislation tracker that the Zero Food Waste Coalition has, there have been a lot of activity at the state level in 2025. So this is just 2025. This is not even things from the past couple years that were either passed or that will have yet to be reintroduced. There have been a number of state bills passed around the country. And this does not even include things like what's happening in Pennsylvania with House Bill 620, which is increasing the tipping fees that are devoted to food recovery infrastructure grants. So that might be kind of, those things are a little bit invisible when you are looking specifically at food waste bans, but that is still something that is really additive and helpful for the industry. So we're seeing that continue. That's really good news. And then in case you missed it, we also launched the National Food Recovery Association this year. And this is something that we've been working on for a couple of years, but this is an opportunity for the food recovery industry to coalesce and then advocate together. And so I think this is really positive because it gives the food recovery industry an opportunity to have a seat at the table, to have a voice in what the industry looks like moving forward in the creation of best practices and hopefully at some point federal legislation as well. So I think that in general, if we don't look for a minute at the federal situation, we're still heading in the right direction, and there's still a lot of really good news out there. So um, don't despair on that end. But it's also not necessarily entirely a desert at the federal level either. And so I really am super grateful to Tori Oto for joining this call. Tori, what's your position with Zero Food Waste Coalition? I know that you're a consultant in the industry and you work with a lot of partners, but in terms of Zero Food Waste Coalition, remind me your role.
Yeah, so I am a consultant with the Zero Food Waste Coalition, and I sit on both the federal policy working group and the state policy working group as a co-chair. So I've been involved both in a lot of this like kind of state work that you were talking about, and then some of the federal pieces that I can speak to today.
Great. Awesome. And then, of course, the existence of the Zero Food Waste Coalition, which is relatively new, is another piece of great news that continues to move all of this forward. And so, with that, I will turn it over to you to talk about what is happening in terms of food policy at the federal level.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that. And hello to everyone online. As Jen mentioned, I'm with the Zero Food Waste Coalition. The coalition launched just 2 years ago, and now we already have like over 300 members across the United States. So the energy is definitely there when it comes to addressing food loss and waste through policy. And we're continuing to see that growth both in state legislation and in action at the federal level. So hopefully can be a little bit less sad news, and I'll try and focus more on the positives and what we're really trying to activate on, so that everybody else here can be kind of clued into what's going on, and feel free to ask questions as I'm going along. So I figured I'd start with how food waste policy was addressed in the first Trump administration, because I think that can speak a little bit to the bipartisan nature of food loss and waste, and kind of what we might expect to see going forward. But Jen, I see you came off mute if there was something you wanted to jump in on.
No, I just muted because I was coughing. So
Okay, cool. Okay, so the first Trump administration actually was a champion of food loss and waste policy. They established the interagency collaboration to reduce food loss and waste. So that's like a collaboration between USDA, EPA, and FDA to work on food loss and waste. They set the goal to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. And then, in the Biden administration, that was expanded to include USAID. So it's kind of like a continuation of efforts that have started in the Trump administration, continued through the Biden administration, and then we're hoping to see, continued in this current Trump administration. And then in 2019, the administration also passed kind of like one of the precursors to the federal strategy that folks might have seen last year, which was Winning on Reducing Food Waste Federal Interagency Strategy. And that included obviously a number of food loss and waste issues that we're still seeing being worked on at the agencies and included in the Biden's version of the strategy. Um, and then on top of that, we also saw momentum and progress through legislation on food loss and waste. So the 2018 Farm Bill was the first farm bill that had food loss and waste measures in it, and that was during the Trump administration. So that includes things like the food loss and waste reduction liaison position that Gene Busby held for a number of years. That's still technically being funded. At the USDA. So we're hoping to see kind of someone else kind of come into that role. And then the first farm bill also included funding for food loss and waste composting, processing infrastructure through the community compost and food waste reduction cooperative agreements that maybe some of you are familiar with. But so it's both funding and like administrative work that happened in the first administration, which is excellent. Next slide, please. And so now I'll kind of speak to what we're seeing now in this current administration, because as we know, things can change quickly with this administration. And so we're just trying to have a good understanding of where it fits in now, where we think there are opportunities kind of going forward in the next 3.5 years. So first up is that the America First Policy Institute, which is a think tank that was designed to advance President Trump's domestic agenda, has actually indicated that food loss and waste is a top priority for them, which is amazing. And then on top of that, there are also close ties between the MAHA movement, like MAHA Moms, Make America Healthy Again, to food waste policy. We've particularly seen that they're interested in the date label piece of food loss and waste, which is to standardize date labels, because that drives like 8% of all food waste in the United States, in connection with their wanting to have labels on food products be more transparent and clear to consumers. Having a date label aspect of that kind of ties in really nicely. And they've actually mentioned the people who are leading on Make America Healthy Again have actually mentioned date labels as a piece of their kind of broader food labeling strategy. So there's definitely an opportunity for food waste policy to be kind of tied into that going forward. And then On top of that, let's talk about the legislation piece of it. So, as we all know, big beautiful bill passed just last week, and that is what was known as the reconciliation process, which took on a lot of the pieces that we traditionally see in a farm bill, which is why we're talking. We've seen so much in the news about cuts to SNAP and all that. Um, but they took a lot of the pieces that were traditionally included in a farm bill. So we're not going to probably see this like classic 2024, 2025, like big farm bill that we kind of all expected to see. But there are talks about now that the reconciliation bill has passed, maybe doing another, what they're calling a skinny farm bill, which would be a very scaled back version of the farm bill to make sure that any of the programs that weren't touched on in reconciliation can be brought back to the table, renewed for the next however many years they want to renew it for. And so that's a great, and I'll talk about this on the next slide, but that's a great place where we can, if it does eventually come up, kind of make sure that food loss and waste is included in that process. And then the last piece I'll talk about that is already good news that we're seeing and is still currently in progress is the appropriations process for food loss and waste. So appropriations, if you're not familiar, is like the annual legislative process that does funding for the government. And so when something like the Farm Bill will authorize funding for a grant program, that they authorize up to a certain amount, but the actual funding that the program will receive depends on appropriations. And so they're in the process right now of doing appropriations for the next fiscal year. And the House has already completed their process, and now it's on into the Senate. But the House version, which is great, included appropriations for the Food Loss and Waste Reduction Liaison, as well as funding for the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, which provides funding for the cooperative agreements that I mentioned before. So funding for food waste processing infrastructure. So that's something that we're in the middle of right now, and looks like it looks positive so far, and then we'll kind of see how the Senate takes it. Uh,
And I think for the liaison, that was, if I remember correctly, one of the sort of asks that we had in the last year was to fund that office.
yeah.
So that's actually, a big win.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big win. And originally, when they first introduced the version of the agriculture appropriations bill, both the Office of Urban Agriculture funding was cut and the liaison funding was cut. And then we got some amendments in to make sure that the funding was restored. So it definitely goes a long way to be able to, when we're at the coalition, what we kind of did is we had a number of our members go submit their priorities to their own membership. We submitted priorities through different portals that the members accept, like the congressional members. And then I think that goes a really long way because they're seeing it in all these different angles. And so when it comes up for a vote, it wasn't controversial. Like everyone was on board for it because they've been hearing it from it in all their kind of different spaces too. So yeah, it's definitely a big win, and we're excited and optimistic about how it's going to go in the Senate.
That's awesome. I'm going to come back to that point in a minute.
Yeah, cool. Okay, let's talk about pending legislation. So appropriations, I already kind of went through that, which is that Senate process is starting. I think tomorrow night they have their first committee hearing, and that'll be like the markup where we'll actually see the language, and hopefully it'll include the same things that the House version already includes. But let's also talk about some of the other pending legislation that is related to food loss and waste. First up is the Food Date Labeling Act, which is the piece of legislation that would standardize date labels across the United States. Where we are now, so it was introduced in the last congressional session. It hasn't been introduced in this current congressional session yet because we're waiting until hopefully we can get a Republican co-sponsor in the Senate, because we already have a Republican and a Democrat in the House. We have a Democrat in the Senate. And so it'd be really nice to have a bipartisan, bicameral introduction from the get-go. So we're kind of waiting to see if we can get that going before it's introduced. We have some great targets that we're working towards in Florida, Kansas, Iowa, North Carolina. And so that's kind of where that bill's at. In terms of how we're thinking about maybe getting through and passed through Congress is we've heard whisperings of potentially a big legislative package around FDA, probably like loosely connected to this MAHA um, movement that's been going on. And so we're hopeful and optimistic that if that gets through, Food Date Labeling Act would be included in that. So that's FDLA.
Can you list those
Yeah.
the Republican targets again?
Yeah, so the senators in Florida, Kansas, Iowa, and North Carolina have indicated like interest in food waste. We've talked to them about FDLA and they've been interested. It's just a matter of getting them kind of across the board. And
Great.
ultimately, one of being one of the original co-sponsors is kind of how we word it. Um, so yeah, stay tuned on that. And if anyone in the audience knows connections in those states, let me know. Would love to chat with you. Um, okay, so that's Food Date Labeling Act. The next two, so No Time to Waste Act and the Reduced Food Loss and Waste Act, both of these are what we call marker bills for the Farm Bill. So originally, when they were introduced in the last Congress, the idea was like if you introduce them in Congress, but really you expect that they'd be included in something like the Farm Bill, they wouldn't really like pass as standalone bills. That's still kind of generally the case. So that's why we're eyeing them for the skinny Farm Bill that I mentioned before. Like if they're going to go through, we'd love it to be included in something like the skinny Farm Bill. And what the two bills do. So No Time to Waste Act has actually already been introduced in the House and the Senate, and it already has both a Republican and a Democrat in the House and in the Senate. So it's bipartisan, bicameral. And it would do a lot of different, it's kind of like the broadest bill, marker bill for food loss and waste that we have. It would reauthorize the reduction liaison. There's like funding for research, for grants, um, and then kind of more like administrative work as well. So I mentioned that's already been introduced, eyeing towards the Farm Bill. The Reduced Food Loss and Waste Act has been introduced in the Senate. It's bipartisan in the Senate. There isn't a House companion bill. But what this bill does is create a certification program for products that are using like food loss and waste or are addressing food loss and waste in their processes. So it's more of a kind of a signaling to consumers of this product, this company is kind of addressing food loss and waste. Um, so those are kind of the main pieces of legislation that we're looking at. I mean, the chances of success on any of these bills, I mean, whoever knows, like, I think all of our guesses are as good as each other's, but like more seriously, I mentioned for appropriations, it's looking pretty good. That's already, the process is underway. It's happening now. Um, and then, and I mentioned too in the House, it was pretty uncontroversial when it was introduced, which is great. I mean, all these bills are bipartisan, so that's, another really, I don't know, a good gold star mark upon them. Um, Food Date Labeling Act, I mean, it's been growing. The momentum on Food Date Labeling Act has been growing exponentially over the last couple of years. More Republicans have been interested than ever before because industry is incredibly supportive. After California passed their version of the Food Date Labeling Act and they're standardizing date labels across the state, that's really gotten industry's attention because they would much prefer to have kind of one standard across the US than continuing this patchwork piece of it. Again, it has that connection to Maha. So there's kind of like a lot of good things that have been worked on for years, momentum building for years that maybe this is like the right moment for FDLA, but ultimately we'll just kind of see we have to see what is going to get through Congress in the first place. But if there is something that moves that FDLA could be included in, I think that's a really um, I'll be optimistic about that if that happens. And then I think probably No Time to Waste and Reduce Food Loss and Waste are like maybe the least likely of these, just because we're really uncertain whether this kind of skinny farm bill will go through. So whether there will be a vehicle for them to get through. But if they do, we're hopeful that, pieces of these bills will be included.
What would the timing be on the skinny farm bill?
That's a good question. I've heard the most recent thing I've heard is like maybe as soon as fall of this year. So yeah, but we don't know for certain if and when it would move. But yeah, so that's all the like federal policy background. Happy to take questions. I'll just give a quick plug. You know, if you're feeling a little doom and gloom about ways that you're able to engage and like see progress, positive progress in the food system space at all, definitely encourage you to consider joining the Zero Food Waste Coalition. We're really aligned, and the reason that we're coming together is to have a common voice on food loss and waste, make sure that we're not getting lost in the chaos of everything else going on, and food waste is included. Um, uh, and so if you're interested, you're able to advance these priorities, learn from experts, learn from each other, meet other individuals who are interested in the same thing. And then on top of that, if you're thinking about how can I actually engage in this, the best way, and we say this all the time and it actually really works, is to reach out to your local elected officials, reach out to your senators, educate them about food loss and waste, the way that it impacts the work, the way that like you're involved and engaged. Because, when we were talking about the appropriations thing and that getting through, we said the same thing to our members. We're like, please just go out and reach out to your members, educate them about the appropriations priorities that we have. And now they're included in the bill. So it's like, even though sometimes it feels like you're like screaming into the void when you're setting those up, it actually does make a difference.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
I want to sort of give a second plug for that idea. That's really important because a lot of, I find local lawmakers, for example, might be aware of what our 412 Food Rescue, our local folks do, but they think of it as a means to address food insecurity. And they're not really thinking about it as part of the food loss
Mhm.
approach to reducing food loss. And so if they can start to think about you and your organization when they're looking at these bills and these opportunities, then they're going to be more likely to support those.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And there's always like, even if you're able to share kind of how it connects to your work, I think that's huge. But if you're then able to also connect it to things that you know that the member or the senator will care about, like landfill space or like the economic ties of waste to food, like there's always another way of kind of framing things that everyone can get on board with. We all are interacting with our food system. So yeah, definitely stay flexible.
Yeah, I completely forgot to ask folks to drop their name and where they're at in the chat. So I would love for folks to do that. I like to just see who's here, let everybody else see who's on the call. There might be somebody, local that you can connect with and work together. And then we're also, if you have questions, we'll take questions now. I do have a question to get us started. And that is, so there is there's so much happening right now, and it just feels like wanting to take action feels like drinking from a fire hose, right? There's so many things that we can do, along with just educating them about food loss and about what we're doing in our communities. Is there like, how would you suggest people keep track of what to ask for when?
What to ask for when, meaning like
Yeah,
how.
just, I mean, and when. So for example, if I'm calling my senator tomorrow about something, should I just give them the laundry list, or is it important to segment it out and talk about things when they come up and they're going to be voting on them? Like what would you recommend the strategy be for that?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I'd say, it is good to generally like share information, but if you really are wanting to have like kind of an impact, I think it is a good idea to stay tuned with kind of what is happening in Congress now. So when we're talking about the fact that appropriations is happening right now, it'd be great. And it already happened in the House and now it's happening in the Senate. Now's the time to ping them about what you care about in appropriations, so funding for the government, what they should be funding. Reach out to your senators and say that. And then same if you are later in the year you're hearing whisperings about, oh, skinny farm bill is going through committee or something like that. that's a good time to then say, okay, well, if you're doing something on Farm Bill, I want to see X, Y, and Z in food loss and waste to be included. So we one way to stay tuned, I mean, the Zero Food Waste Coalition, we have regular meetings where we're updating our members on kind of what's happening. And so that's a good way to like stay tuned into kind of what's happening. There are a number of different listservs that are out there that'll help you, like Morning Agriculture kind of will tell you um, what Congress is working on then, and if you want to then use that as kind of your timeline as you're going along.
What was that listserv that you mentioned? And are there any others that you would recommend?
It's Morning Agriculture, which I'm not actually even sure which website, maybe that's Politico, but yeah, Morning Agriculture, they talk about kind of all the ongoing congressional updates.
Yeah, I know for food security issues, FRAC is always great. Food research. Oh my God.
Isn't that funny? You get used to saying the same like
Yeah.
abbreviation, and you're like, I don't actually know what that stands for.
And I feel like I probably do, but now that I'm trying to say it out loud, I can't think of it. That's a great way to keep on top of the food security. But a lot of times that's more focused on things like SNAP and WIC, which are critical, but they're not the bread and butter issues for food recovery organizations a lot of times. So that's one of the reasons why I really, oops. Oh, geez. See what I mean? I just should not be allowed to drive. Um, that's one of the reasons why I really appreciate the Zero Food Waste Coalition, really highlighting issues that are important to our universe. Can you drop those links here, please? So what I can do is I can write in the notes, which I believe is Food Research, if anybody knows, Food Research Action Center. Take that with a grain of salt. And then Morning Agriculture.
Or it's the one I've subscribed to is Politico's Weekly Agriculture. And then if you just type that in Google, you can sign up super easily.
Okay, and then of course the Zero Food Waste Coalition. And the is I oh my God, too many acronyms. Food rest. You'd think I would know this since I helped start at Food Recovery. My brain just completely melted. There's way too many acronyms that just happened. F NFRA, National, there we go, NFRA, National Food Recovery Association. We are focused on a lot of things, not just the advocacy, but staying plugged in when there are things that are super important to our constituency. We will certainly bring them up. I think that your first go-to for information on this is the Zero Food Waste Coalition, but we will be highlighting and magnifying what they're talking about as well. Okay. All right. Are there other questions that folks have for us? I think it's really important to remember that, you know, there is room for, I don't know if I would say optimism overall, but I think that as you pointed out, there's a good chance we're going to get some things through that are helpful to food recovery. It was in fact the first Trump administration, thank you, Linda, that sort of codified the focus on food waste. Um, I don't believe that that had been done before, so that's pretty hopeful. And I know Scott Hutchins, has he been passed yet, through yet? The Undersecretary for USDA Research, another acronym, REE, what is it? Research, Education, Economics, Research, Economics.
Undersecretary for Agriculture for Research, Education, and
Yeah,
Economics.
he was the one in the first Trump administration that was the champion for a lot of the food waste things, and he's been nominated again. So that to me is also really, really good news because we know that the will at the top is mercurial. and not necessarily going to stay focused on one topic from one administration to another, but having the folks in charge of the agencies that are champions is really critical. And so having him back in the picture, I think is super helpful and hopeful.
Yeah, 100%. It tends to be the people who are closer to the work who are able to like make the decisions on whether food loss and waste would be a priority. So it doesn't even necessarily need to be on like the White House's radar per se for it to still see some progress.
Yeah, I saw a hand go up. I don't know if that was a mistake or if that was somebody had something to say. I talk with my hands. I end up giving a thumbs up all the time without even meaning to.
Mhm.
Um, so do you know if Zero Food Waste Coalition is planning another action day at any point in the future this year?
So we don't have plans for one this year yet. For those not familiar, the Zero Food Waste Coalition, part of what we do is we will occasionally have our members all fly out on the same day to Washington, D.C. and do like a day of action. And you meet with a bunch of different members of Congress, educate them about food loss and waste policy priorities. This year we did one that was kind of when right before the appropriations, reconciliation, and all that was being discussed. So we really focused on that. And then, of course, Food Date Labeling Act, since that's been a priority of ours for a while. Um, I think because we're in a bit of a wait and see of what is gonna be moving and what's gonna be a priority, we want to make sure we're using our members' time well. And so we're gonna wait and see if something comes up where it'd be really effective, useful to have a bunch of our members in person kind of
Yeah,
advocating for these priorities, then maybe we would have another one this year.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that the marching orders are, first go make sure that you are talking to your members of Congress and your senators to let them know that you exist, let them know how important reducing food loss and waste is in your community, and the benefits that it brings to the people that they serve. That's the first thing. And then the second thing would be to let them know as they're debating say the Food Date Labeling Act, that this is something that you support. For people that are in those states that you mentioned, that you are looking for Republican targets, Iowa, North Carolina, Florida, and one other one.
So Iowa, Kansas, North Carolina, and Florida.
Yep. Definitely call your senators and let them know that this is something you really support and you would love for them to be a co-sponsor for that bill.
Yeah.
And then to keep in touch with, join the Zero Food Waste Coalition so that you can know when it's time to call about the skinny farm bill or other important issues.
Yeah, and I'd say too, if depends on your capacity, I think advocacy is a choose your own adventure for how much time you're able to get dedicate. But
Love that.
if particularly if you're in a key state or you think that, say you're in a red state or you have a red senator who you think could be interested in something like date labeling or a piece of the food waste policies, I'd maybe educate yourself about what those are, see if there are ties to your senator, your member, and then consider doing something even bigger than like just your own voice. Like consider doing something like a sign-on letter, like rally together a bunch of people in your jurisdiction who are also supportive, and then you send that up to the staffers, the federal staffers, the state staffers for your office and say, look, all these people are supportive of it. We'd love to have a meeting and talk to you kind of about it. And whether that's you just meet with them in the office, you can bring them to a site visit. If you have a food recovery organization, you can bring them out to your organization, show them directly why date labels or why whatever issue that you're kind of prioritizing, why it connects to what they're doing, why they should care, and then the action that you want them to take. So you want them to sign on as a co-sponsor, you want them to introduce this bill, and then keep following up on it. Because I think it's really easy also to be like, okay, well, I'm going to do this thing, and then we're not going to see anything happen on it. but so much happens behind the scenes. And sometimes it takes months where you're not going to hear anything. You're going to ping, you're going to follow up, and they're going to be like, oh, we'll send it up, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, okay, well, I actually heard that they're meeting with, the current sponsors team and they're talking about it. So just remember that like your education, yes, sometimes it's going to feel like, okay, well, did that happen? Did that do anything? There's a lot happening that you don't see. And it's all worthwhile.
That is such a great reminder because I know it can feel like shouting into the wind sometimes.
Totally.
Do you think it's more effective to get well, so you talked about a sign-on letter. Are you talking about like individual constituents, so the folks that support your organization? Are you talking about other organizations or both? And sort of what's the advantages, disadvantages to those two?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have done both versions in our advocacy. So we've done when we've been working. So, for example, with the Food Date Labeling Act, we've done sign-on letters in a couple of these key target states. And that's been organization by organization because that's our network, because our network is organizations and we wanted to be able to show the diversity of food industry support, right? So because it's something like FDLA, we want to show that there's support of food recovery. We want to show that there's support of advocacy, of industry, farmers, whoever it may be. So that was kind of our priority. But if your network is, say you're a food recovery organization, you have a lot of people that you're able to meet with as individuals. Like an individual letter can also be really impactful. Say, I'm a constituent in this jurisdiction and I care about it. That can also be equally powerful. It's just kind of how you'd be able to do it most effectively, I think is going to be the way that you should. Don't try and like force it into, if you don't feel like you have like the organizational network, then I
Right.
wouldn't say try and do that because you can
Right.
use the individual network really powerfully. Yeah.
And that could be a lot of work, right? Is to go out and try to find other organizations that want to sign on to like a coalition with you. So if that's not your bailiwick, then
Yeah.
just having your individual supporters call or send emails might be more time efficient and effective.
Yeah. 100%.
Well, something we're doing here, and this is our targeting our state officials, but you could certainly do it for federal or for both as well, as we're doing a legislative luncheon later in the summer where when session isn't happening in Harrisburg, the local county caucus is coming to our site for lunch, for a tour, for some education, talk about the opportunities at the state. And so that's a lot higher effort, but it's also, you get all of your members at once. So you don't have to go around and make 10 visits. So you get everybody in your space. And it's super impactful too, because they get to see what's happening. So I think there's a lot of different options. I love that description of choose your own adventure. There's a lot of different options depending on what your organizational will and bandwidth is to make an impact.
Yeah, definitely. And, you also can choose if you want to do the federal pathway, you want to meet with your federal members and senators, or you want to focus more at the state level and do the same with leadership in your jurisdiction. I think with state, what's good is with state representatives and senators, or however it works in your state, they're going to be really responsive to you as a constituent too. So it's more natural, I guess, to build that relationship. And keep
Yeah.
that going. Yeah.
And just one other success story is we sent a letter about the loss of our EPA grant to all of our federal officials, and two of them got together, and it wasn't just in response to us, there were other organizations, but two of them got together and sent a letter to the EPA and did a press release and did just a whole big sort of like talking tour about how this was really bad for local organizations and for the community. And so they can be your champions as well, which is really tremendous.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's hard to like if you are think of if you're a member or you're a senator and you're working on a lot of different issues, you just might not know the impact of some of these bills on constituents in your state. And so I just wouldn't assume that they already know it's happening, they don't care or whatever. You have to do the education piece of it to get them invested, and they just might not know. But they can be your
Absolutely.
biggest champion. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then if just one more last call for questions, and then I'll talk about what we have coming up for webinars. Um, we are doing two upcoming webinars. Our next one is in the How to Start a Food Rescue series, and we'll be talking about funding. And Aubrey Alvarez, who, by the way, is in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa. Yes, in Iowa, and is a big advocate, will be joining us to talk about getting startup funding for your organization. Oh, and I don't have the other one up there, so we'll just have to leave it at that. Well, thank you so much, Tori, for being here. This was super helpful. We will be sending out the recording to everybody. So you can look for that in your inbox. And I really, really urge everybody to sign up for Zero Food Waste Coalition emails, to join the coalition, attend the meetings, just to keep on top of this. There's some really great opportunities right now, surprisingly. So that's exciting, as well as some things that we want to make sure we're sort of standing in opposition to. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.